he was gracious enough to give some time over to us to ask us what we were talking about with our election integrity efforts. And our election integrity efforts are focused on certification. And we kind of want to contrast some of the things that Senator Buxton said during our meeting with what's happening in Indonesia. The primary reason that the Indonesians run their election the way that Steve and I just described is to vote in person. Everybody's got to show ID and vote in person, and then everything is done manually. So you have something as crude as poking a hole in ballots rather than filling
with
them
a nail.
With a nail, and then everything is tabulated by hand, because the government and the people of Indonesia believe, and I think rightfully so, that it would be very, very difficult to actually conduct an election using computerized equipment, mail-in ballots, or voting on a computer in person.
With any kind of accountability at all,
Exactly.
An ability to check it.
And that is what we have moved to, a computerized system, for a couple of reasons, at least from what I've read. That was the Help America Vote Act around 2002 or 2001.
Yes.
And everything was going to move to, with the help of the federal government.
Federal takeover, again, of our elections, which is not a good thing.
And they made a lot of funding available for people to move to a computerized system that could be mail-in or whatever people chose, to make it more efficient. But what that actually did was actually put it in reverse. It made it much more difficult for county clerks to actually conduct the election, and in general made it more expensive and less transparent, and made the elections less secure than even what they're doing in Indonesia.
Well, and from a populace or a voter perspective, and at least in the people I've talked with, even at a convention where you have delegates, they like that because it's convenient. It doesn't require stepping out of your house, stepping out of your seat to actually cast a ballot. And so they're willing to give up, Roy, I think, security.
In Indonesia.
Well, no. Here in the U.S. is contrasting it with Indonesia, where we here in the U.S. as Americans don't understand clearly the importance of what an election is, and they're willing to give up actual ability to validate the election or certify it for convenience sake.
Or is it that, or do they not understand? Or do they not understand here in the United States how vulnerable the election systems actually are, because they've never actually had to run a system like a transaction processing system to realize how the system can be, how vulnerable a system like that is, and actually had fraud and had other things where you say, oh, I made something went wrong.
Well, clearly it's a combination of both, I would think, both convenience and ignorance, because I've got to believe that people, if they really felt that our elections weren't fair, would be willing to get up and actually go down and cast a ballot. Don't you believe that? Or do you think?
No, I do think that. I think actually most of the people we spoke with believe that the elections are secure, and they think that you're a crazy person. And I think many of them do.
You're an insurrectionist and threatening the democracy and all those things.
Exactly. You're a crazy person for thinking otherwise.
Yeah.
But also 90%, 95, 98% of the people that we've spoken with do not have industry experience actually running a transaction processing system. So like an election management system, if you think about it, is very similar to a transaction processing system. Like if you were to go to buy something at the store and go to checkout, that's a transaction. You're voting with your dollars to purchase a product, but just like in an election, you're voting with a ballot. You're voting your opinion with a ballot, but the ballots are actually worth a lot more than the typical retail purchase, and we don't even really understand that.
Something actually just occurred to me, like when we do a banking transaction, for example, we deposit our paycheck into the bank. Don't we want to have the ability to validate or certify, if you will, that it's actually in the bank and actually attributed to your account? And don't we have the ability to actually go on and look to see if it is? And if there's a problem, we're jumping all over it to make sure that
Precisely.
it gets put in the right account. And yet with our elections, we don't so much as give it a second thought. I'd say generally the masses don't. And why not? Because if you think about it, elections affects everything we do. Everything in our life is affected by those in office. And we want to know that these people are duly elected. And if they are, we can live with the consequences. But if they're being selected for us, that's a whole other story.
And that's what was really interesting about Senator Buxton in talking with him. And we did not talk to him about what was going on in Indonesia. The article, I think, came out after our conversation with Senator Buxton. But what's interesting is, Senator Buxton got it. He understands what our push for with regard to certifications, because the state of Utah, that is, has implemented a process where there is a group that is supposed to, quote, audit the process of the election, after the fact, and then provide recommendations and critique, if you will, of the election process. But they answer to the state legislature. And what he recognized was what we're advocating for with a certification process is one where the certification process, the actual due diligence, is performed on behalf of the Board of Canvassers, because the Board of Canvassers in each county is supposed to certify the election. But their analysis, their due diligence in the report is actually provided to the public. And there is supposed to be a separation, and there would be in our plan, between the people who are actually doing the due diligence on behalf of the Board of Canvassers and the actual beneficiaries of, one, the certification, which would be the normal regular registered voters, and the people who directly benefit and have to rely upon the election system, which are the politicians themselves that are elected. You do not want to have the people who are, quote, certifying the election or auditing the system to be the ones that are benefiting from or relying upon that system to be elected. You want to make sure that there's a separation there.
What reasonable person would actually do that in any area of life, much less our elections? And we do it all the time. I mean, our lieutenant governor oversees her very own election. And I've recently heard, I can't validate this 100%. And if anybody knows differently, please call in and let us know. But that she's come out and endorsed someone that's running as an AG. Now she's responsible to count the votes for his election as somebody that she's endorsed. What rational person cannot see that that's just inherently wrong?
Well, it's a conflict. It's an inherent conflict of interest.
It sure is.
And what was interesting about reading, and this happened in France as well, which we could step into, but in Indonesia, they went out of their way to make sure that conflicts of interest with regard to the election itself were minimized. So when people were casting ballots, They made sure that when they were actually tabulated, that multiple people are there to watch and do the tabulation, multiple parties looking to make sure there's no mistakes, and the actual tabulation process is videoed and put on YouTube.
You know, there's so many things like that we can get into. Right now, I'm going to say, hey, you're listening to KMMU radio. KMMU.org is how you listen to us. We're also live streamed on X, Rumble, and YouTube, and who knows what else soon. Telegram at some point. So I want to throw out the call-in number because very soon, 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to start taking calls, and we hope that you'll become part of our conversation here, whether you agree, disagree, or otherwise. Please call in, and that number is 385-899-2134. And this is part of Main Street Media. It's a new group coming to, and you all elections, CRT. We have a group, the Kagan group, and they're going to be talking about health issues and pesticides in our foods, among other things. And so it's going to have a diverse group of hosts, and we invite you to put this down on your reminder list to listen in. It's from 2 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, right here at kmmu.org. Just click on the live stream button and you are in. So, Roy, speaking of Senator Buxton, this is his last term. He's not going to seek re-election. I think he's been in office over 10 years plus. He's head of the Rules Committee right now, and he's been very receptive to what we've been saying, starting with when you and I went to present at the Lieutenant Governor's election survey and election audit report that we were not allowed to comment at. He stood up for us at that meeting and spoke up to the chairman and said, you need to let these people speak. And we followed up with him, and he was very receptive to us. He's up in Davis County, in Roy area, I believe. And I truly want to give a shout out to him for meeting with us on very short notice before Christmas. It was a very, very enlightening conversation we had with him. Unfortunately, I had to step out early, but you met with him for well over an hour,
right,
into 2 hours. And what else did you guys talk about?
Well, he said he asked some questions. His primary concerns with our approach was, what is the overall cost of this process we're talking about? And we estimated it, and what was the timing of getting it certified? And then went through a bunch of what ifs, like what if, if somebody finds a real problem, and what if they cannot certify the election, and what's the fallout from that, and who bears liability and responsibility for an election that people are not able to certify. Because if an election is not certified, then the election basically has to be redone.
Yeah, but contrast that with not getting it right and going through with the certification anyway.
And that's something that he acknowledged. He said, I said, what good is an election that is done that is ultimately fraudulent, or that many people think was done fraudulent, and then you have people in office who shouldn't be there?
Right.
Or that a lot of people think shouldn't be there.
Yeah, what are the consequences of that? Isn't that way worse than taking a little more time to get it right?
Well, I happen to think so.
Me too.
Okay.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're talking to each
That's
other.
right.
We're talking to the computer here. But um, he could see that as well. And then he said, well, what happens if an election is not certified and then the seat goes vacant for a while? I said, well, better to get it right and let it go vacant. Or what happens if the company that is hired to do the due diligence on behalf of the individual county board of canvassers, we have 29 counties here in Utah, by the way, and they find a real problem, and the county board, and or actually even worse, this is one thing he said. He goes, "What happens if this company colludes with somebody in the state to kind of cook the election and cook the certification?"
Well, that's part of our verification by the citizens themselves.
Exactly. That was the conversation we had. He goes, "Well, what happens if they collude with people to cook the books, if you will?" And I said, well, the check and balance for that is the data that is used by this third party company that is hired by the state to check and do the due diligence on a county by county basis. That same data would be made available to people like us, like our callers, and then we could then hold that company civilly responsible, financially responsible, and hold the individuals at that company civilly responsible.
That would deter a lot of people, I would think.
Yeah, well, make sure that those people knew that they were, because there's a lot of smart people out there. If they had access to the same data as, say, a big accounting firm like Ernst & Young or in Deloitte & Touche, they could find an error in what Deloitte & Touche did. And we're not talking about an error that is an honest error that, just somebody made a mistake, but it's something that would be like demonstrated to be willful blindness, like they did it, or malicious intent to actually do something and deliberately overlook something.
Right. So I've got to ask the question then. Somebody has something to hide. It's clear to me that if we go to such lengths to make the information available, or in their case, they don't make it available, that we can't check on it, that they will not give it up, that they make laws so that they can protest it based on law, giving up the information, so we can't check. They purposely don't want to make it transparent. We have a problem. We have a big problem. And we need these legislators to see that, because I don't believe, I believe most of them are very, very honest people, just like Senator Buxton is. And he wants to do the right thing, but they've not really been educated to understand that if somebody is purposely trying to hide something, they usually are. They're hiding something. And what they're hiding is who is the duly elected person in many cases.
Well, I think they're also trying to hide, in many cases, the weaknesses within the system, because there are people that become involved in the election process, like people we've met down, like Bruce Funk.
Yeah.
Down in
Bruce Funk was a county clerk in Emery County back
he was a county clerk for 20 years up to around 2002.
2002. He was one of the first people that took a look inside. At the time, it wasn't ES&S, it was Diebold.
Yeah, which
machines.
Was purchased by ES&S.
And it actually, just to give a brief overview of that, it actually he went back to Congress to testify in Washington, D.C., about how these machines can be compromised. And without getting into all the details of that, he was eventually shunned here in the state, run out of office, and silenced, because he pointed out at the beginning, when machines were introduced, the flaws in the system.
And what he said, and he's a very good man, and what he said was, the other county clerks could see the same problem, but they did not want to lose their job. And so they just never raised their hand. They never raised their hand. And he was forced out of his office, his position as county clerk for 20 something years. And being a county clerk, a shout out to all the county clerks, not just in Utah, but everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult job, and running elections is just a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of what they do. And yet it's also one of the things that they get the most grief personally for actually doing the election. And it's a very, very, very hard job.
They're underpaid.
And they don't get paid very well.
They're understaffed, they're underpaid, and quite honestly, who could expect to have areas of expertise in everything that's involved in an election? No one person could.
Especially an election that's run with computer systems and computer software and
massive databases and on and on and on. And so we just need to get people to understand, to take a look at the vulnerabilities in the system, and to, I think we said this in the past, for our first show, we visited 25 of 29 counties here in Utah, and now we're focusing on the state legislature because they are the ones that actually will have to introduce the legislation and change the law to make our elections transparent, to make them certifiable, which they currently are because we don't have the data. Hey, this is Steve Aste and Roy Piskadlo. We are on Main Street Media, KMMU.org. Listen in, tell your friends. And here in about 5 minutes, we're going to open it up to the phone lines and let you call in and have a discussion with us if you'd like. That call-in number is 385-899-2134. 385-899-2134. So, how did that conversation end up with Senator Buxton? What did he recommend we do as people that are trying to get new legislation passed?
Well, what he recommended that we basically meet with the president of the Senate, and that we also meet with the head of the House.
And the lieutenant governor.
And the lieutenant governor. But more he was focusing on the first two, the Senate body and the House, to get their buy-in. And then we also need to talk to Lieutenant Governor Henderson. And
we say we got to go into the lion's den there, but I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. Everything that I've heard has been conjecture at this point. I want to go in and hear her out herself.
But one of the things that he said was, he said that and it goes back to what we started with just a second ago before you announced the call signs. The people that we're talking to, both at the county canvasser level, Senator Buxton's level, and so on, they do realize that a lot of data is being kept from us. And some people take the view when we say, well, you need to be transparent, you need to put that data out there for the average citizen to be able to do the same analysis as anybody else, as an expert. And they then say, well, if we do that, we can't do that because the laws are there, and and don't you trust us? And that's immediately they come back.
Hell no.
Well, no, we do trust them. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put them in the seat.
No, actually, I don't, to be honest with you.
I know you don't. But
I want to trust them.
But you were saying that there's a lot of people out there that say they're hiding something because they are not allowing us to see the data. There are a lot of people out there that say, well, don't you trust us? And they really are offended. And I do think that they aren't trying to hide anything, but they're offended when you say, I just want to check your work on a third party, and they are offended.
Well, they're going to have to get over that. They really are.
No, I understand that, but it's a general human thing. But I
Well,
also
sure,
think that
sure.
there
People
are
become
people,
defensive and so forth. And
but there are people like what Bruce Funk went through with
oh,
his malice.
the guy got steamrolled.
He got crushed by the state,
Yeah.
and they basically threatened him with lawsuits and convictions, which forced him out of his. He couldn't afford to fight it, and
Yeah,
it forced him out. He was canceled. He's
they
like,
threaten litigation. They crush you economically. You've got to consider your family and everything else in it. It's not just you. And they use these coercion tactics and fear tactics to force you to bow out or bow down.
which
to
is
them.
why the other county clerks, because Bruce said that he had other people that were sympathetic to his position and could see the problem,
And yet,
but didn't want to put their hand up to
right,
say,
see?
otherwise they were going to get blown out.
Right.
But going back to, is everybody who's in a position withholding data, are they in the same position as somebody who means actual malice, like what they did
Of
to
course not.
Bruce Funk? And that's
Of
my
course
only
not.
point.
No,
It-
but again, no one's above reproach. We as citizens have a right to double check work. And it may not be from nefarious activity. It may just be a mistake.
And that's what Senator Buxton ultimately said. He goes, look, I get it. This certification process that you're talking about is really for the public. It's not for the people who actually are in control of and or rely upon the election management system.
Well, and that's the way our system in this country was set up, for the public, for the people. It's all for the people. None of it's for the elected officials.
and
It is for the people.
and that's what stood out about the system in Indonesia, right? Because
Yeah.
everything was set up so that the actual tabulation of the ballots at each precinct level is actually put on videotape, where they kind of put a camera down on the table as they're counting the ballots.
Well, we put video cameras on some of our drop boxes, but failed to put them on.
But the actual tabulation is in a black box,
Well, I know.
and that's the problem.
Well,
And that's what Indonesia completely did, and actually France did as well, and some other countries do as well, because they realize that once it goes into a computer, you're handing over responsibility of tabulation to a computer. It needs a very robust certification process that is open to the public to make sure that everything is going.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And Senator Buxton realized that, but he said getting that through, for example, Deidre Henderson, okay, where she is going to resist us, in his view, okay, because it's her system, it's her
And in my view as
responsibility.
well, and in a lot of other people's view, quite frankly. But again, I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. We will be setting a meeting with her. If you can hear this or somebody relayed this, we want a meeting with you. She's not denied us one. We've not asked for one yet, but we plan on doing that in the very, very near future. Hey, we're going to open the phone lines up for call-in. We'd love to speak with you. This is Steve. I'm along with my partner here, Roy. And please give us a call at 385-899-2134. We're talking about elections, election integrity, election certification. We are in the process of putting legislation forward in the 2024, and the lines are open. We'd like to talk to you about it. We'd like to hear your thoughts about our elections. Are they fair? Are they not fair? Do we need to change them? Do we need additional legislation or not? You know, one of the things, Roy, that I found out about when we met with Senator Buxton is that new legislation has been introduced for the upcoming 2024 session having to do with our elections. That's 230 pages plus in length. That's in addition to the already 463 pages of Utah Title 20A, which it governs our elections here in Utah. So we're going to be, what, almost 700 pages in election code. That doesn't count all the other statutes that are referenced within the election code, such as Utah Election Code 63G, when if you read that, you can easily add another 150 to 200 pages. So all total, we're approaching 1,000 pages if this new legislation is passed. 1,000 pages of election law. How crazy is that?
And we haven't gone through this new proposal yet, but it doesn't address the issues that the Indonesian government was addressing using its in-person day of process, or what France does in its for its elections.
It was interesting in that article on Indonesia, and I heard that this also happened in Peru and maybe Mexico, but
It is in Mexico too.
they literally put a finger in an ink well to indicate that they have voted. And I actually had a Peruvian tell me, she now lives here, that they actually fingerprinted you. I'd have to verify that, but after reading this article, it was really a sign. It was like sticking a permanent I voted tag on your shirt, but they did it with ink, so you couldn't vote twice.
They do that in Brazil, I believe. Okay. They do that in. They did that in Venezuela. I don't know what
How
they're doing anymore.
archaic.
Well, it's interesting because in Brazil and in Venezuela, they've moved to machines as well. And in Brazil, for example, there's no paper ballot, and there's really no ability to actually audit or certify the process at all, because the data, everything goes into a black box. Everything is electronic. There's no paper record at all of the balloting process. And so even though you kind of have to do things in person and you have to show picture ID and then you get your finger dipped in ink and so on, all that's undone by putting it behind this electronic firewall, if you will, that walls everything off. And so it's not just enough to just the finger in the ink is to make sure that people only vote once on that day. And so, but you still have to make everything transparent, which again, France does by making everything manual, in-person voting, and with paper and pencil or pen ink. And then everything is tabulated by hand in front of a bunch of different people, and they videotape the tabulation. And yet in France, they do everything all in one day, and the results are announced before the next morning.
Yeah, well, I would submit that we can do that. We can do it better. We have the technology, and well, we need to get rid of the technology really and go back to the basics. And if I had my way, I'd put a gold stamp on your forehead saying I voted. That's unremovable. Everything in paper. But we're not even asking for that. We're just asking for the ability to go in and look at the records after the fact. And they're not going to allow that. That's just not right. And we need to change that. We need everybody's support out there. We need people to stand up with us and help us in this fight. This is KMMU.org, Main Street Media Matters. And this is Steve Aste and Roy Piskadlo with Truth and Consequences. We'd love to hear from you. Please give us a call at 385-899-2134. So let's move on from that a little bit, maybe. And of course, we'd be glad to talk about anything. But what happened to President Trump here in the last couple of days was beyond believable.
Oh, what happened, Steve? I didn't hear about it.
You didn't hear about it? I'm sure most of you heard. And if you hadn't heard, the Supreme Court of Colorado has upheld.
Actually overturned.
well, they upheld the original. Okay.
No.
No,
The
the
lower
original was
court,
they didn't want him on the ballot, and then it was over. It was shot down by.
actually, so
the lower
somebody
court of
somebody put
appeals.
a sued in the court in Colorado to remove President Trump from the ballot
Why?
because
He's an
he is
insurrectionist?
ineligible to hold office because he committed insurrection. He insurrected the country, according to him.
He's not been. That's not been proven, has it?
So that was based upon the riot that occurred on January 6th. The original, there was a trial, a bench trial. A bench trial means that it is done in front of a judge, and there was a hearing over a 2-week period of time where there was evidence given, and then the judge made a decision, and what she decided was that President Trump was an insurrectionist, and even though he has never been indicted for insurrection, and if you haven't been indicted, can't be convicted in a court of law. But there was one other thing. But then she said the 14th Amendment, which is what this was, this ruling was under, was
sure the third section of the 14th Amendment,
right? That third section 3 of the 14th Amendment didn't apply to the president. Okay, that's what she decided, and so therefore he could not be removed from the ballot. So then that was appealed by the same group that brought the original lawsuit to the Supreme Court in Colorado. The Supreme Court in Colorado is 7 justices. They are unelected, and they are all appointed. They're all Democrat. They were appointed by Democrat governors. Okay. Now, of that, it was a 4-3 decision. So there were actually 3 dissenting Democrats.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there were 3 dissenting Democrats, and several of these have come out and said this was a total BS decision. And so the 4-person majority, justice majority, decided that President Trump should be removed from the ballot, so he can't even run, and as a result, and said that because he did insurrect the country. I like using that word as like a verb, insurrect the country or the government, and therefore, and the 14th Amendment applied. That's what they overturned on the lower court, that he should be removed. Now that decision was immediately stayed. What that means is that there's a pause. It's like
right,
and
pending review by the United States Supreme Court.
Well, it's being appealed. It's being appealed.
Well,
by
and
Trump.
The last I heard is that the Supreme Court has agreed to look at this.
I have not heard that.
Okay.
Okay. It was.
Now, I think I may be actually mistaking that with the Supreme Court has agreed to look at one of the January 6th insurrectionists that was convicted. They've agreed to look and review his conviction.
Yeah, that's
which can, in essence,
Trump.
Impact this
That's
decision.
a completely different discussion.
It is, but it ties in some ways.
It does, but it confuses the whole issue of what happened in Colorado.
It does, but also the willingness of the Supreme Court to start looking at these issues.
True,
is a huge step forward.
But the Supreme Court cannot agree to review a decision, until it's been appealed. And to my knowledge, President Trump's appeal has not yet been filed. I have a feeling that it's going to take at least a week to file that appeal, unless they were writing it in advance of this decision.
Yeah.
Now, some people have said, well, what's the big deal? Trump wasn't going to win. He wasn't going to win Colorado anyway.
By taking one person off the ballot, they disenfranchise the voters in Colorado. in my view, you're disenfranchising the voters all across the country because you're diminishing that person's chance of winning, which affects every state and every person.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that is those are many of the arguments that I've heard that of how outrageous this decision was. It was just, it really is a black mark on the whole judicial system, to be honest with you. It's like these judges are just, they're crazy.
Well, if anyone has the remotest understanding, is that a word? Roy's shrugging his shoulders. He doesn't know either. Any of you English literature majors out there, could you call in and find out if remotest is actually a word? But now I forgot what I was going to say, Roy.
Whether what we're talking about has any merit, then please call in. And our phone number is 385-899-2134. I'd like to hear what your understanding is of the situation. I've heard actually the lieutenant governor of Texas, who has different responsibilities from our lieutenant governor here in Utah, but he said he was on being interviewed, and he said, given their decision, there's no reason that we couldn't remove Joe Biden from the ballot here in Texas. Why couldn't we?
I heard the same thing about one of our people running for governor, Phil Lyman, visited Arizona recently.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that all the people pouring into the border, many of them they don't catch. You don't know how many are coming in. And the ones that are actually turning themselves in are likely the people that do not have a bad intent for our country. But how many more are coming in that hide? What if you didn't have something to hide? If you were on the up and up, we're letting you in. If you come to the entry points,
we're not letting them in.
Oh, we're not.
No, we are letting them in, but they can technically all be removed because they came in here illegally.
But they're not being. That's the point.
I know they're not.
They're supposed to be, and I guess the short of it is, in Arizona, you don't have to show any form of ID at all to vote. So it's disenfranchising the system there, which in turn disenfranchises the whole country. And Biden is complicit. In fact, he supports this policy. So he's really committing treason by allowing. Which
is actually what the lieutenant governor in Texas said. He goes, hey, look, they decided that what happened on January 6th was insurrection and without having any indictment, any proceeding in court, and said, he's an insurrectionist and should be removed from the ballot.
Yeah, let's tie that back to exactly what happened in Colorado.
Yes, and so now in Texas, what the lieutenant governor was saying was, okay, he's not enforcing our laws. He's allowing millions of people to come across into our country, which is illegally, okay, and therefore is committing treason and is doing an ongoing insurrection of our country.
I agree with that.
Okay, and so under the definition that the 4-person majority reached in Colorado, we could do the same thing in Texas for Joe Biden.
I'd be interested to find out from our lieutenant governor if she's willing to leave Biden off the ballot here in Utah because he's a tyrant, because he is not doing his responsibility to this nation by protecting it, by keeping people that intended harm out. Rather, he's purposefully letting them in.
It would be interesting to hear what her opinion is.
Right.
However, I think that doing that would have to go through a court of law. Now, I do think that the
Well,
Supreme
no,
Court,
I agree, but I would
I
just
do-
be interested to hear her opinion.
I do think that the Supreme Court is going, our U.S. Supreme Court is going to take this case and is likely to overturn this case because it's just so ludicrous. It's just absolutely crazy. But it would be wonderful, in my view, is if Texas, Utah, the red states said, okay, we're going to initiate our own lawsuit to remove Biden, just to
Right.
do the tit for tat. I think that would actually increase the likelihood that the SCOTUS would actually take this up, because remember, they did not take up the case in that was filed at 2020, that was filed by the states to allege that states like Pennsylvania and Georgia did not follow their own election laws.
Personally, Roy, it really pisses me off that these states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona,
Violated their own laws.
Well, yeah, they violate the law, and it doesn't just affect them in those states. It affected us here in Salt Lake City, Utah, as to who ended up president.
Which is why that suit was brought by the Attorney General of the state of Texas, and our Attorney General, Sean Reyes, actually signed on and joined the suit. But then the Supreme Court ultimately rejected it. They turned it down. They were not willing to hear the case. I think that they're going to be willing to hear this case here. However, this appeal, because the Supreme Court doesn't have to hear anything, right? You submit a brief to get your case. If you're going to appeal to the highest court, they have the ability to say yes or no, I'll take it. Right. I have a feeling that they're going to take this one because already California has announced that they're going to try their best to get Trump off the ballot.
Right.
Okay. Other states are going to follow suit.
Yeah, and I agree with you that maybe red states should also fight fire with fire and try to do the same thing for Biden based on what we just talked about.
Which I think is completely BS. It's garbage to do it. However, it proves a point.
Well, that's why you would do it.
That's the only reason you would do it, is you would file and then have have all of this popping up all over the country, and the red states and the blue states. Basically, we're in a civil war.
Right, and you can't have just one side doing it all the time, because we have to stand up for our rights as well, or you're just not heard. You're just not heard. And we have to do that. Hey, this is Steve and Roy coming you from the lofty loft at the Aste House. We are with Main Street Media, KMMU.org, and we are looking for call-ins. The phones are literally ringing off the line, ringing off the hook, but we can always take one more, and so we just want you to call us. See what's on your mind. 385-899-2134. Give us a call and tell us what's on your mind. We'd really enjoy hearing from you. So, have we solved all the problems?
No, it's actually very distressing, this, taking Trump off the ballot. And it's just, to me, it really is a sad situation, because you look at the indictments of Trump in New York and in Georgia and in DC on January 6th, and you actually read the briefs and you look at what's being done, and you realize that this is all just election interference. This whole thing it's entirely election interference.
It truly is.
And
they're weaponizing the FBI, Homeland Security. Yeah. And did you saw that movie, the Police State, didn't
Yes,
you?
of course, yeah.
I have yet to see that. What was it pretty accurate based on what we know? I mean, was it?
Well, I think it was, because what it really did was it showed that not people like President Trump is a very high profile figure, and his defense is going to be costing him probably about $50 million when it's all said and done. You know, the thing in Colorado, the various lawsuits, which are unprecedented in our country's history, to my knowledge. But what police state showed was that the average person, like people who are Christians, people who are protesting abortion, praying outside of abortion clinics, are being targeted by the FBI and arrested. And defending yourself, just hiring a lawyer and going through and defending yourself in those situations can bankrupt a person. That's why Bruce Funk, for example, had to resign. He could not defend himself. He wanted to stay in there, but it was going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars,
if not hundreds of thousands,
if not hundreds of thousands, to defend himself against what these guys were doing to him. And he just couldn't do it.
That's why the normal everyday person can't stand up to this kind of thing, is because they will come and they will crush you financially or otherwise. And who wants that?
Well, it's not even who wants it. It's a different form of tyranny.
Oh, it is tyranny. Absolutely.
And you cannot support yourself. Martin is on the line.
Oh, it looks like we got a caller. That's great. We'd like to hook him in. Martin? How you doing, Martin? Can you hear me? Hello, Martin.
Steve, I got Martin here. Here you go.
Pass him on. Hey, Martin, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Calling in to comment on President Trump being left off the ballot. One thing that we need to be super cautious about, no matter what side of the argument we're on, is the due process. President Trump hasn't been convicted of anything.
He hasn't been indicted. He hasn't been indicted of the charge that is open to being dismissed, right?
Absolutely. So they're stating that the reason he is being left off the ballot is for his actions on January 6th. There is no indictment, and so where does innocent until proven guilty play into this? We cannot interpret the Constitution in a way that suits our personal agendas. We have to. It goes like another argument that we can have is something similar with the First Amendment. How is it that one person says it's hate speech when you don't agree with them? If you don't agree with their political views, they become angry. But then they're again chanting for the annihilation of a race or a religion. But that's protected speech. We got to have
continuity.
You have to apply the law evenly to everybody,
symmetrically.
And so it doesn't. It's not a way. We shouldn't be using the interpretations of our Constitution to suit our personal agendas. I don't like you, so I'm going to find an interpretation of the law. And the other question is, did the state of Colorado, did the Supreme Court overstep their boundaries? Why are they trying to set a legal precedent at a state level? This, they have to be fair. If we have to follow the due process and follow our Constitution.
Martin, you only have to be fair if you're held accountable for something. And we've really gotten away in this country from holding people accountable for their actions. And when we don't, they're liable to do anything, or they will do anything because there's no consequence.
And that's really unfortunate. That's the shocking thing that occurred in Colorado. I mean, even some of the justices, the Democrat justices, came out strongly against the opinion remove, the decision to remove, for exactly the same reasons, Martin, that you were just saying. But as Steve just said, these people that are put in these positions as judges, it's very difficult to hold them accountable for their behavior, and this is clearly it's malpractice in my view. For a judge to say, oh, there's going to be no due process. I'm going to then interpret, as Martin, you just said, I'm going to interpret the Constitution to fit my purpose. I don't like the guy. And so therefore I'm going to decide we're going to remove him from the ballot. It's terrible.
Well, a great example of proper of listening to both sides. I'm going to go back to one of our founding fathers, John Adams. He believed in the law and the proper and equal application of the law. Even we'll go to the Boston Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
What the British soldiers that fired upon the crowd that resulted in the death of our first 5 American martyrs of the American cause. It was John Adams, who would later become our president, who defended those soldiers. It's not, he didn't defend them because he liked them, because he agreed with them. He defended them because he believed in the equal and proper application of law.
And he was vilified for that.
He was, but you wouldn't have found a more passionate patriot. He was denied military service because he was an excellent diplomat. And that's where his greatest purpose and his greatest service to our country was, perhaps our first great diplomat. But again, he believed in the equal application of the law. Even if he didn't agree with the other side, they still had a point. And then and then we can't just say, I don't like you, I'm going to find something against you, and not follow due process.
And said another way, what you are saying is so fundamental to a functioning government. There is, if without equal application of the law to not just people like the 3 of us here right now, but all the way up to people as public figures like President Trump with the money and wherewithal to defend himself. Without equal application of the law, you don't have a republic. You don't have a government that functions. You have tyranny.
I would argue that's precisely what we have right now.
Which goes back to what you were saying, to see the movie The Police State, which I recommend for everybody to go see. It's online. Because that's exactly where we are today. It's exactly
we
where
truly are. It's extremely sad, and it's extremely sad and disappointing to see so few people stand up in light of literally losing our country, losing our freedoms. And I could go into a litany of list of ways in which we are losing our freedoms in this country, the least of which is not election integrity, elections being stolen. I often wonder how we can inspire more people to get involved, to stand up and be heard, and what is it going to take for people to understand that we're losing this country? Don't they see it? What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, police state, having experience in Latin America, having lived down there and watching unequal application of the law, it is frightening. It's the same stuff that I saw down there is something I do not want here. When people go out to voice their opinion and they're like, I don't like you, you're breaking whatever law, or let me create a law specifically tailored to make sure you cannot speak. That's not a road we want to go down.
Martin, which countries in Latin America did you live?
I have spent time in Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and those are some of my earliest memories. That's Latin America during the 80s and early 90s. Those are difficult times if anybody who's lived down there or is from down there can attest to. And then
Well, describe, for example, what would happen in Peru when you talk about equal application. What did you see that you see happening here in those countries?
Well, picking and choosing, like you look, they said we're going to bar President Trump on the 14th Amendment. He hasn't been convicted of anything. We see if people get frustrated, they want to be heard, and eventually people who are angry or frustrated tend to easily can be manipulated or turn towards violence, which is another set of issues we do not want. Where let's look at. We look at a lot of times. We'll look at the most recent case in Peru where they were trying to change the rules to suit themselves. They haven't had a stable government. We'll take Peru for an example. They haven't had a stable government. They haven't had a stable president since Fujimori. And Fujimori wasn't a great president. He was borderline despotic. But at the same time, that situation was created because they were in full-blown insurrection. But we don't want to turn to those times. We have where you had Castillo recently said, I don't like these laws, I don't like these rules, I'm going to change the definitions, and I'm going to use the change definitions to rewrite the Constitution to suit me. And then he calls out for a coup. And that's a very recent example. And then he calls for a coup to dissolve Congress. And what happened is Congress says, we're not playing along, Army go arrest them.
So are you familiar with the recent election that occurred, presidential election that occurred in Argentina?
Yeah, I saw that the Peronistas dominated and dominated with and manipulated things for nearly 40 years since the reintroduction of democracy in late 1983. We had one party that dominated everything, and they always found a way to stay in power. So eventually, luckily, they broke through. I mean, when you first have you see the Peronistas where they have this system where one group stays in power. First you elect the husband, then his term runs up, then the husband rules through his wife, and then she keeps going on, and then she picks a crony and then becomes the vice president, but still runs the country. And they keep rewriting the rules and to stay in power. And eventually, I think people just got fed up, and that's why you have a libertarian economist become president and is.
Didn't they?
Tired of new definitions.
They conducted their elections differently this time, didn't they? They went to all paper ballots as well. They got rid of the machines. Didn't that allow him to win, essentially?
It did. Well, we'll look at what set things. Macri. So we see Macri was a president that was elected fair, and I think we see all of a sudden when the machines get brought in, they bring back Christina Kirchner, who her and her husband had built the country out of millions, if not more. They went back they took out the machines. Every time there's the machines, you end up getting a very left-wing populist government. They changed the way they did elections, and now we have, now we have a new president. Let's see if this continues, because he still has to deal with Parliament. Let's see if there's going to be fair and partial on the parliamentary elections, so he can get them done. Yeah, they did change the way they did the elections, and what do you have? A different point of view.
What do you know?
Well, my understanding was that they were conducting an election, with the machines 6 months or so before the presidential election. They found massive problems with the accuracy of that contest, and everybody said, okay, there's no way in hell we're going to run this presidential election using this equipment. And they just switched 6 months before the presidential election to all paper in-person ballots. And I agree with you, Steve. I do think, and I agree with Martin, I think that if they had run the election the way Brazil did on machines, that it would have been a different outcome than Javier Milei. It would have been a different outcome.
Hey, Martin, hang on for a minute. Want to get some information out there real quick. This is KMMU.org, trying to give Utah a voice. And we are Steve Aste and Roy Piskadlo with you live today. Please give us a call at 385-899-2134. Yes, I'd like to get a quick shout out, and we have a gentleman by the name of Austin Hepworth that has thrown his hat into the ring for Attorney General. He is running as an independent, and he is required to gather 1,000 signatures by the first part of January. We'd like to give you the information on how you can sign his petition to get on the ballot as an independent. I do know Mr. Hepworth. He is a very conservative individual, and I personally believe that everyone has the right to run for office, and I'd like to give you the information on how you can support him by getting him on the ballot. Again, his name is Austin Hepworth. And if you go to A. Hepworth, that's AHEPWORTH at believe.legal.com, you'll be able to sign the petition to get him on the ballot. A. Hepworth at believe.legal. Martin,
we have another caller. We do appreciate you calling in and appreciate your perspective on Latin America, and we completely agree with you, and we thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Martin. Call in again, would you, sometime?
Sure.
You had a great perspective on things. I appreciate it. I guess we have another caller on the line, John. How you doing today, John? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
Well, we're fumbling our way through this, and we're doing great, I think. What's on your mind today, John?
Well, election integrity, and you happen to also mention, so I was listening to the feed. You happen to mention Austin Hepworth.
Yes.
I'm going to tell the listeners out there that if there's anyone that I could, on a personal level, endorse, having known them for an extended period of time, who's a freedom fighter, that happens to be Austin Hepworth. And absolutely, they would do themselves, their community, their county, and their state a great everyone to vote for him right at this moment. But it is a very important thing that we get good people who have integrity to get on the ballot. Now, as you guys have been talking a little bit about election integrity, we need to make sure that the elections are verifiable, that they are honest, and that they've been counted correctly. That is another step as well in the process. And these are two of the biggest keys. They're the two, they kind of go hand in hand. I don't know which one is first, which one is the chicken or the egg on this, right? The getting good people to run or making sure that we have integrity. But as Stalin said, I care not who votes, I care who counts the votes. And I would say that he would say now today, I care not who counts the votes, I care who tabulates the votes.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we agree with you.
The chicken and egg comment, the chicken and egg comment is a very important one, because I know people who have running for elected office is horrible. I have not done it personally. I'm sitting next to somebody who has run for election.
Yes, I have.
And I know that it sucks. It's a terrible process. It costs money, it costs time. And there are a lot of people out there that are reluctant to run for election, not just because it's a difficult and demeaning process, but because they're concerned that they're not going to get a fair shake. So what you were saying a moment ago, how can you run for election, or are you going to get the best people to run for election if they don't think they're going to get a fair shake? So
I've had this conversation. Probably the wisest person I know personally, my father. We were having a conversation where he goes, it's hard to get good people to run, and this was 5-10 years ago, because it's such a dirty business, right? To get good moral people to run, is a good moral person does not want to put their family through the ringer that they have to go through. Well, now you throw on top, not only they have that same ringer that they had, it's even increased even more now, and on top of that, they have no confidence on whether it's a true and accurate vote as well. So, just call me old-fashioned, but I'm young enough or old enough, you could say, to have remembered going in and doing hand-counted ballots, where I met someone in person from my community was there. They saw my license. They handed me a card. They tabulated it, and that was done in person. To me, that is the best system. It's really the only system, and it's the most foolproof system.
Well, I know that we would agree with you. I think that based on our conversations with politicians throughout the states and in other states, that people love their mail-in ballots so much they're not willing to give it up. And in light of that, it's short of going back to paper ballots at the precinct levels day of, Roy and I have put together a certification plan, if you will, based on the system that we currently have. And this is what we're trying to get pushed through the legislature right now. And it's kind of based on the Sarbanes-Oxley model that's used for financial transactions and financial companies, publicly traded companies. And I think we even have a long uphill battle with that. Just getting people to accept that.
Throw in this last thought. Can I throw in this last thought, and then I know you guys need to get My last thought is, why do people not want to give up those ballots? Because they've been told, and millions have been spent to convince them that those mail-in ballots are just as accurate and just as good as going into your precinct in the past and voting. And counted ballots.
We agree.
We agree with that, John, and it sounds like you need to run, but we'll speak to that for sure. And we really appreciate you calling in, and I hope that you do again sometime soon.
We will. I will definitely be in touch with you guys again. I'll be calling you again in the future. Thank you for your time.
All right, John.
Have a great day.
Thank you. And just FYI, we are Steve and Roy on KMMU.org, and we will be on weekly on Wednesday afternoons from 4 to 5 p.m.
6.
And oh no, it's 4 to 6. Sorry,
Yeah.
4 to 6 p.m.
We get to enjoy each other's company for 2 hours.
Yeah, they wanted us to do 4, but I didn't want to sit next to Roy that long. But that's okay. John really makes a good point. I've seen a lot of different things, even at convention where we were voting on certain issues, and we could have done it. We could have done hand ballots in a matter of a half hour, 45 minutes. People voted it down. They wouldn't even get out of their seat to come down and drop a piece of paper in a bucket to count.
Again, I think it goes to, we here in the United States, I mean, everybody has a smartphone, except for my father-in-law, who's 90-something years old. Everybody has a smartphone. And, people trust that their information is going to be protected, and they don't realize what's going on behind the scenes, where their information is being used by lots of different people. And
well, they're very trusting here in Utah.
Well, and that's because a lot of our commercial transactions are online. But if you actually look at the commercial transactions, like on Amazon or anything else, there's multi-factor methods of verifying that the person who's making the purchase, or if you're on like something like eBay making the sale, are indeed real people and are the right people to be, the correct people to be doing the transaction, and there's no fraud. And we just don't even have those basic protections in our election system, not even close. And people don't realize, this going back to the ignorance comment, they don't even realize. I mean, if you think about it, if you're doing online banking transactions, that's a 2-factor authentication process, where you log into your bank account online, or like Amex account or whatever it is, and then they'll send you separately to your cell phone like a 4 or 10-digit number that you then have to type in,
right,
to verify that you are the person that is actually on the other end of the line.
I actually did that today. I sold a pretty small portion of my stock portfolio, and $4,000 transaction. And just to make that trade, they had to send me that authentication. There we go. Number. And
before your transaction would be consummated,
before it would go through. Yeah,
exactly. And there was an article just recently where Rasmussen did a poll, and they found out poll of people who actually did mail-in ballots, and 20% of those people admitted, obviously it's anonymous, but they admitted that they cast their ballot fraudulently. Either they cast it in another state, they signed on behalf of another person,
they filled the ballot out for their son that's away, or their
or fill out an extra ballot and cast a ballot. all sorts of different things. That's 20%.
That admitted it. How many actually did it?
Well, but you think about that. If you're signing on behalf of somebody else, okay, and you're then mailing in the ballot, isn't the signature verification supposed to catch that? Because the
Well,
signature verification is so good that, you know, the artificial intelligence that's used to read the signature, or the human being that's there to match the signature, is just unable to catch it. Unable to catch it.
it's unable to catch it. And also about those, they run through what's called an Agilis machine. And the Agilis machine scans a person's signature. And of course, any computer is programmed, and it's programmed with a certain setting to allow certain amount of error, and that can be programmed to wherever you want it. And if it's not approved, it's then kicked over to an individual that is supposed to verify it and
Cure the ballot.
to cure the ballot, and they are to look at it and decide thumbs up or thumbs down. Do we count this one or not? I happened to go in and volunteer in this last election in Salt Lake County. I spent 3 days and 8 hours a day, and I did all jobs. I did not verify signatures, but I talked to some people that did. And I asked them, I said, what is your experience with that? And the first lady said, well, I got to watch a 20-minute video this morning. And I said, well, how did you do on the test? And she said, there wasn't a test. I said, really? And you feel comfortable verifying or certifying that this signature is actually the one of the person that actually cast the ballot based on something they signed years ago at registering for their driver's license? They said, not really. I don't feel that comfortable doing it, and yet they're the ones doing it. I had a conversation with the second lady. It basically went exactly the same. How much training did you have? Well, I watched a video today. Do you feel competent that you can actually verify this signature? She said, not really. So that's our system.
But that is precisely why, when you did your stock transaction, that you had to have a two-person or two-factor authentication. Otherwise, the transaction wasn't going to go through. And when you set it up, you set up your account, you logged in, you provided all your vitals plus your cell phone, and I imagine with a stockbroking account, you had to provide some sort of picture ID, and there was some other due diligence done on you so that your whole account was set up.
Well, sure, at the beginning when I set the account up.
Exactly. Somebody said, show me your ID, Mr. Aste, and you did, and they matched your picture and so on. And so that once that account was set up, there was a human being verifying that it was you and verifying that your cell phone was correct and that there was a two-factor authentication. And that way, when you went and actually did your transaction, for example, casting a ballot, they sent you something to your cell phone to say, confirm it's you, that you're actually doing this transaction.
Right.
And if you're going to vote online by mail this way, you would need, in order to get the same level of security that you have for a money account, like a bank account or a stockbroking account, at a minimum, you would need the same kind of setup that you have for your stockbroking account or your bank account for mail-in ballots. That's the only way you could ever do it.
I agree 100%. And I, Roy, personally believe that soon we will be doing all of our voting on our phones.
True. And the thing is that we're going to end up doing it without the two-factor authentication. And going back to the finger, the ink in the finger, and what happened in Brazil, if you go that route, there's still a black box, and it can still be manipulated behind the scenes, and you wouldn't even know. So, in other words, getting that two-factor authentication is still not enough to create the level of certainty that you would have with being able to have a real certification, a valid certification, where third parties like ourselves could actually get the data to make sure that when you cast your ballot in that system that you're imagining, you get your two-factor authentication. Okay, you did really cast the ballot. But how do we know that they didn't stuff the ballot box with other people that don't exist?
We don't know.
We don't know.
And what's
that's what
interesting,
happened in Brazil, because that election was stolen. It was stolen from Lula stole it from Bolsonaro.
when it goes into that black box, into cyberspace, wherever, all tracking goes out the window. I remember at state convention, we had to vote on something and they decided to do it with their phones. And I thought about that, and here's a phone that all the components, well, the phone is manufactured in China. All the chips in the phone are manufactured in China. This is a phone that can do all sorts of things that I'm not even aware of. So we cast our ballot on the phone, on an app that was created in a foreign country. So this didn't have America written on it anywhere. We were casting our ballots on a phone, components made to an enemy, by an enemy, and through an application that who knows what it can do. Can it flip vote? Can it? I don't know. But we don't, that's the point. We don't know what it can do once we lose the tracking ability of it. Chain of custody.
The only way that we would know is to have 100% access to all the data behind the scenes, access to how what machine instructions occurred on the hardware that was used, the actual database. All that needs to be made public so that you can actually do your own due diligence, or somebody with expertise that's not the people benefiting from the election could actually do it.
Let me ask you a question.
That is real certification.
Let me ask you a question. We visited, as many of you know, 25 of 29 Utah counties. We visited with county clerks and several of the Board of Canvass members. And for those of you that don't know, a Board of Canvass member is your elected county council members or county commission members. Which of these people, the county clerks, their staff, and Board of Canvass members, have the expertise to get inside a phone, for example, and the databases, and to even know what they're looking at? How many would you say? I mean, virtually none.
Virtually none. And even then, there's an important concept. Let's go to the banking, okay, or your stockbroker example that you just did. The company that is managing your account and allowing you to do your transactions online is they want to give you the flexibility, you, Steve, the flexibility to be able to do your sales and purchases online. But they want to make sure that somebody isn't able to break into your account and do something to your account. And if they do something to that account, and let's say somebody broke into your account and did that sale that you talked about, and it wasn't you, okay, then you find out after the fact that a sale happened that was not authorized by you. You didn't conduct it. It just happened. Then that company is liable for financial damages to you.
Yeah.
So they have an enormous incentive to make sure that confirm who's actually making the sale. And so they tie all those things together, and their incentives to check and make sure are 100% aligned with you.
Right.
Okay. Now,
and somebody at the end of the day is accountable.
Now, if we do what we're talking about with elections, the people who are saying that they're accountable and withholding the information are the same people that benefit when they're elected. And so therefore, the only method of being able to check the election results, that the election was done properly, is to have some third party with expertise that
With
is-
no financial incentive or no other kind of incentive,
incentive and actually has downside, financial downside, accountability, if they then go and do due diligence on the election that was
did you
conducted.
just say doo-doo?
Do perform due
Okay.
diligence, do due diligence, and then are held responsible for whether their due diligence was done properly or not. And that's the only way to do it. Okay.
And that, folks, is essentially what we are proposing in a short manner with the legislation that we want or planning to submit.
And what's being done in Indonesia, what's being done in France, where it's in person, somebody has to show a picture ID, then they get to cast the ballot, then the ballots are tabulated with multiple people looking over each other's shoulder.
Do you
It's all
think, though,
videotaped.
Roy, realistically, we are, as a country, as a state, ever going to get back to that?
The short answer is I don't think so. However, my point is that process of balloting and tabulation of ballots avoids a lot of the problems because it's wildly transparent. Okay, you should still
I like
have
that. Wildly transparent.
you should
That's good.
still have a certification process, even with what John was describing, where you go in, you show ID, you do a hand ballot, you fill it in, you put it in there, and then some group of people that are at odds with each other but are tabulating and looking over each other's shoulder. That is still a good certification process, and it still needs to exist. Anytime you have, without that open transparency between people who are at opposite ends or different or don't have 100% alignment with each other, that's what's necessary to do this. And that's what Indonesia does by construction, by design. That's what France does by design. Okay. And that is a much safer way of voting because it doesn't require, it's not a black box. It doesn't require all this understanding of technology. But,
Right.
And I agree with you. I don't think that we're going to get there until people understand. If people actually understood what I think we understand, they would say that's obviously a better way.
So-
it's cheaper, it's less expensive.
Education is the key then, because I think that we've talked to so many people that, well, quite frankly, you and I didn't understand the system.
Before
Until
we started
we-
jumping in. Mm-hmm.
How are we to expect then that the populace, the voting public, is going to take the time to understand this issue and the ramifications of not getting it right? That they're just assuming that the votes are, and that the people are above reproach that are conducting
That's
our
why
elections, but they're not.
people like Mike Lindell, who's, I mean, spent so much of his own money and taken, like John was saying, like taking the abuse of
cancel culture and
everything. Like they
You know,
tried to just put him out of business, and yet it's we need people's help to do this as well. I mean, you and I have been traveling around the state at our own expense to go and do this, and it's quite honestly hard, and it can be kind of frustrating.
kinda. It's very frustrating. You know, sometimes you feel like you're just beating your head against a wall and no one's really hearing you and nobody understands and they're not willing to look, not willing to listen. And what to me now seems so obvious that it didn't before. I mean, I will admit that, but it does now. It seems so obvious what's happening. And I don't just assume that people are going to automatically do what's right. It's the constrained versus the unconstrained view of life. That
Good book, by the way.
book by Thomas Sowell, who is a highly recommended book. It's essentially that people are, the unconstrained are essentially good in that they can always progress, they can always get better, they can always attain and achieve a higher level of perfection versus the constraint in which we understand that people are inherently
Flawed.
bad and flawed. Not necessarily bad, but yeah, bad, sinful, if you will, and flawed. And that there are certain absolutes that you can't attain above and beyond an absolute. Whereas this unconstrained view is that there's no end to what humanity can become or humans can become. And I just don't believe that.
And with the right laws and rules in place, if you're an unconstrained person, then people will just do that and everything will get fixed and everything will get better.
And we know better than
Yes,
that.
we know better.
That's just simply not the case.
That's called getting red-pilled.
Yeah. Red-pilled. So we are Steve Aste and Roy Piskadlo on KMMU.org. Main Street Media is our parent company. What we're trying to do is to give everybody in Utah a voice. We're trying to spread the message, Roy and I, specifically on our elections, how they're inherently flawed, what we're trying to do to change them, in working first with our county clerks and board of canvass members, and now with our state legislators, in getting a new legislation passed that would put certification of our elections in place. But instead, we're hearing quite the opposite, that they're going to add more rules and regulations to the current election code, which is now 463 pages long, soon to be well over 600, I understand, if this new legislation is passed. And one of the things we found, Roy, is that many of the county clerks and certainly the board of canvass members don't understand the rules. It's too complicated, convoluted, complex, lengthy, and in some cases contradictory, and in many cases just poorly written, and it's been piled on on top of each other for years and years. And they're looking to add 230 plus new pages of this code this year, just in 2024. How are our county clerks supposed to even know what to do under the current rules?
The short answer is they don't, and many of them have admitted that to us, and to great fear. They really do fear, because they honestly want to do the right job, and it's not a matter of, in my view, putting more money, to the election. The elections are run at the county level, and a county like Salt Lake County, Lanny Chapman, who's the county clerk here in Salt Lake County.
And by the way, I think we've met with her 4 or 5 times now, either together or separately, Roy and I, and totally believe 100% that she wants to do the right thing, that her intent is good and to put on great elections, honest, fair. And go ahead, Roy. But I want
to. But she has the resources, and she's running obviously a much larger election than, say, in Daggett County. I mean, there's 650-ish thousand registered voters in Salt Lake County, and there's 1,200 citizens in Daggett County, and probably only 800 or 700 of those vote, or actually registered voters, and even less than those actually cast a ballot. And she has a staff of about 6 or 8 people. They're
when you
full-time.
say she, you mean Lanny?
Lanny Chapman
Yeah,
has a staff of 6 or 8 people. You and I have met most of them. They're good people. but their level of understanding of what actually happens inside the machine, the thing that scans the outer ballots and so on,
Well, and even the Dominion tabulation machines.
and the tabulation machines
they don't have a clue what's in them.
they don't have, because those things are being run by tax by those companies.
Interesting side note, just a couple of days ago, I put in a grammar request for the contract between Dominion, who owns the rights in the voting machines, and supposedly proprietary information inside of them. I put in a grammar request to see what that contract says, because I have heard rumor that nobody within the state, no person, elected official or otherwise, can look inside those machines to evaluate them, except Dominion itself.
Yep.
So it'll be
And
interesting to see if I get that.
you should also put in a grandma request for, the grandma request is the government's, the state government's version of what's called a FOIA request, which is a Freedom of Information Act, which is at the federal level. Grandma request is at the state level. Just put in one for Agilis, the Agilis machine, because that's owned by Runbeck. It's a separate entity owned by Runbeck, and they're the ones that actually scan the outer envelopes of the ballots, including the signatures, to determine which signature is a good signature and which signature is a bad signature.
Yeah, I'll do that.
That's a complete black box.
I'll do it for the Agilis machine, and I'll also do it for the ES&S machines, which are the Salt Lake County uses Dominion. All the other counties, with the exception of one or two, use ES&S, and I don't recall who the other two vendors are, or the other vendor is for the other two counties.
I don't remember that one. It's a really small. ES&S and Dominion together are about 85% of the total market nationally for election machines. And I don't know whether you knew this, but what is it in what's the name of the county in Maricopa County, which is the largest county in Arizona, which is where a lot of the problems were, has a system, a Dominion system that is almost a carbon copy of the one at Salt Lake. The contract, I understand, is the same, and it's very, very similar system.
By the way, in respect to that, I read a report recently that our lieutenant governor gave high praises to the Secretary of State for the job that she did in Maricopa County.
Really?
Yes, I did.
Huh.
I'll dig that up and we'll post it here.
That's very interesting.
It's very interesting that
this for the 2022 election.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
For the 2022 election with Kerry Lake, etc. And so
Wow.
it'll be interesting to. I'll dig that article up. So
that was a deeply, deeply flawed election. If anybody online or listening to us is aware, that was the one in Maricopa County with Kerry Lake and Abe Hamadeh, and that actually is a Republican election administration, believe it or not.
Well,
so this is
apolitical.
It's apolitical.
This is not based on one party is doing something wrong, the other isn't. I think both Roy and
both parties
we agree. The uniparty, as many call it, the elites, if you will, that want to control us, and they do it in large part through our elections. So, hey, this is Steve and Roy. We are coming to you live. KMMU.org is how you access this podcast. It will soon be on a radio dial near you. I do not know of that handle yet. We appreciate you tuning in. Our show is called, it's brought to you by Main Street Media. It's a local Utah company where we are bringing several radio hosts together under one roof to bring you a variety of hopefully non-biased truth. And if you don't think we're speaking the truth, I know that Roy and I, and I'm sure all the other hosts, would invite you to enlighten us. Give us a call and tell us why what we're saying is not true. Give us your point of view. That's what we're after here, the truth. And I think that all of us need to learn that we cannot create our own truth, that there is an absolute truth, and that we have to be brave enough, courageous enough, and just human enough to accept that we don't know everything, and that we have to be willing to change to what the real truth is, whether we like it or not. It's absolute truth. Just like gravity, you can't change it. It exists. It's a law of nature. You can't change it. The truth. It's not something that each of us can invent ourselves. Our call-in number is 385-899-2134. We are not taking any new calls at the moment. In fact, we're just about getting ready to sign off for the day. We appreciate Martin and John calling in today. They had some really good things to say. And Roy and I will be back next Wednesday at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 6 o'clock. Tell your friends, tell your family. We'd appreciate your participation. KMMU.org. Click the live stream button. And we're coming to you on YouTube, on X, and Rumble. And I think they've got some more channels planned in the near future. So Roy, I'm signing off for the day.
Well, wish everybody a Merry Christmas. Talk to you after Christmas, and hope Santa brings everything you've asked for.
Well, almost everything. And we don't want to spoil you. But like to get you involved, as regulars on our show here. Tell your friends and family, and join us next time. Stephen, Roy, Piskadlo, coming from the Lively Loft. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.